everybody. We're back again to wrap up Unit 1, finishing up the last section, Section 1.4, called Dividing Up the Human Body. Okay, so if you haven't made your account with the OpenStax website, which has got the digital textbook that we're using for this course, you really need to do it now. Again, you can go back to the syllabus and find the website right on the front page of the syllabus, or you can just do a Google search for OpenStax and it should come up. Create your account for free, and then you can do a search in science and look for Anatomy and Physiology. It's the only Anatomy and Physiology book in that website. This information is Chapter 1, and if you download the PDF, it's PDF pages 33 through 38. Okay. This is going to give you access to diagrams, definitions, other information that's going to help you with this anatomical terminology that we're getting ready to go through in this section of the notes. Okay, so make sure you get your OpenStax textbook account open and so that you can access that book. All right, first thing we're going to talk about is anatomical position. This is something that in the medical field, it's a positional reference. That is to make sure that there's consistency in how the body is oriented related to its anatomy. Okay, so let's say you're a medical examiner, you work in the morgue, you're a crime scene guy, or checking out, making notes about how this person died. Basically, in order to make sure, everything is compared the same way, you got to have the body in the same position every single time. This goes for across the world. Okay, so it's called anatomical position. This lady here is in anatomical position, and your definition there says it's a position that places the body. Now, you can either be standing or lying down. I guess if you're dead, you would be lying down. But you're facing forward, so your face is forward, and your legs and feet are together. Now, the important thing is your palms are facing forward, because if you were making notes about, certain directional terms on the body, the hands need to be in the same position at all times in all cases. So in this case, the palms are forward and the back of your hands are to the back of your body. Okay, so we got some directional anatomical terminology. There's a video link there if you wanted to watch an additional YouTube video. I will post the PowerPoint on this so you can actually click the access, the link. You can't really do it in this video lecture, but you'll have the PowerPoint too if you want to do it. But some of these are simple. Some of these, you may not have ever heard of before, but we're going to run through them. And this is where your OpenStax textbook comes in handy, because, again, they have these words defined in there, may even have some pictures for you. So right versus left is pretty self-explanatory. You got the left side of your body and you got the right side of your body. Just keep in mind when you have like a piece of paper sitting in front of you, it's opposite of what your hands are, because turn the piece of paper, let's say we had a picture of a heart and we're trying to look at the right side of the heart versus the left side of the heart, but when you put it down in front of you, now it's opposite of that. So this side on the paper would be, this is my left hand, but it would be the right side in the picture. And this is my right hand, but on this side, it would be the left side in the picture. So and it's kind of hard to demonstrate this, in the video, and everything's going to be digital pretty much for a while. But I always tell my kids when they're taking a test and they're trying to see which side, left and right, that they can take the actual, like I said, if this is a picture of a heart, put it up in their chest, and then they're like, okay, this is the right side, this is the left side. So they don't get that confused. Anyway, hopefully I didn't confuse you with that. All right, inferior and superior. Most of these words are when you're comparing certain parts. So inferior is when you're talking about a part that's lower than something else, and superior is when you're talking about a part that's higher than something else. So we could be down on the legs and say like the knees are superior to the ankles. Or we can move up higher and talk about parts on the face. You could say that your chin is inferior to your eyes because, your chin is lower, so it's inferior to the eyes. So again, inferior is lower, superior is higher, and it's just when you're comparing parts. Okay. Anterior, posterior, ventral, and dorsal kind of go together with humans standing upright on two legs. The anterior side and the ventral side are the same side. So anterior means the front, so we're talking about face all the way down. Ventral generally means belly side, so our belly is on the anterior side. Where posterior is going to be your back side, the back of your head, your back, your butt, all the way down, the back of your legs. Dorsal also refers to the posterior or the back side. So anterior and ventral are your front or belly side all the way down. Posterior and dorsal are the back side all the way down. Proximal versus distal is referring to parts on either your arms or legs. And the point of attachment is your reference point. So if you're referring to, let me see if I can make my picture a little bigger. Okay. So if you're referring to your arm, we're looking at the shoulder as your point of reference. So whichever part is closer to the shoulder would be called the proximal part because it's closer to the shoulder. And whichever part you're referring to along the arm that's further away from the shoulder would be called the distal part. So, of course, my fingers are the most distal part because they're the furthest away. But if I'm comparing fingers to wrist, let's say, the wrist is proximal to the fingers, okay? Because my wrist is closer to the point of attachment, my shoulder, than my fingers are. If you're talking about elbow versus wrist, the elbow is the proximal part and the wrist is the distal part. So again, and same thing on the legs. Your hip, though, is the reference point for your legs. So whichever part on your leg is closer to the hip, then that is the proximal part. Whichever part is further away from the hip is the distal part. Okay, so your ankle would be distal to your knee. Your knee would be proximal to your ankle because the knee is closer to the hip. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Again, it's just you're using the points of attachment as reference. And if you think of something that's in proximity, that means you're closer. You think of something that's distant or distal in this case, you're further away. All right, we also have lateral and medial. That's referring to the midline. Okay, so you have imaginary midline. Anything that's closest to the midline is called medial. And again, we're comparing parts. And anything that's further away from the midline is called lateral. So my nose is pretty much the most medial part that I have on my face. And then you could say your eyes are lateral to your nose because they're moving out. The ears are even more lateral than the eyes are because they're further out. So you could say the eyes are more medial than the ears because you're comparing those two parts. Your eyes are closer to the midline than your ears are. Okay, so lateral and medial deal with that midline. Whatever's closest to the midline is medial. Whatever's further away from the midline is lateral. And the last two for this slide, superficial versus deep, that's talking about layering. So we're looking at like skin and muscle and bone and stuff like that. So anything that's superficial is closer to the surface. Anything that's deep is further in. So, of course, bones are pretty much the deepest. But let's say you're comparing skin versus muscle. Your skin would be the most superficial, well, the muscles would be deep in that case. You could do muscles versus skeleton, and you could say the muscles are superficial compared to the skeleton because the muscles are closer to the surface, and the skeleton would be the deepest part. Okay, so that's just referring to layering, which one's closer to the surface. All right. So this is just showing a picture. So I did include the picture in here. It shows right and left, shows your midline, medial, lateral. You have this in the OpenStax textbook as well. So hopefully that'll help at least give you a visual for what those words mean. All right, there are a number of terms used when referring to regions and parts of the human body. There are a ton in this picture here, but I listed the ones that we work with every year on this slide. So sometimes you'll see a variation on these words. So the OpenStax, to be honest with you, I haven't checked every single one of these words, but depending on which textbook you're in, you might find a slight variation, but generally they're all the same. Cephalic is the head, buccal is the cheek, the orbitals are the eyes. It's just fancy anatomical words for normal everyday parts, body parts. Carpal, that one. Some of these you might know because if you know like some of your bones, the wrist bones are called your carpals, but if you just point to the wrist anatomically, that is your carpal. Digitals are your fingers. Manual is your hands. That one might not be too hard to remember. Pectoral is your chest. So you got your pecs that you work, muscles. The femoral is the thigh area. So if you know anything about bones, the femur, of course, is the thigh bone. So some of these, hopefully, you'll be able to figure out without having to memorize too much. Cranial, skull, hopefully you know that one. Trying to see if there's any more that stand out. Abdominal is your abdomen area. So anyway, these are the ones you need to know. There are pictures in the textbook, a little clearer than the one that I had on the other slide, again, in the OpenStax textbook. And we will be doing a little activity with these. And usually my test has like multiple choice portion. We'll see. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to test you guys this year. So, but still, I need you to become familiar with these words. All right, one of the things that we do with the abdomen, and this comes into play especially when we dissect the rabbit, which I doubt you guys will do for real this year. That's usually our dissection of the year, the big one. Maybe we'll do the virtual. We'll see. But your abdomen area is divided up into 4 main quadrants. They're pretty easy to remember. You have a right side and a left side, and you have upper quadrants and lower quadrants. So the right upper, the left upper, the right lower, the left lower. There are certain organs that are found in each quadrant. So we'll talk more about that later. Okay, sometimes it's necessary to look at the body as a series of planes, which are imaginary lines that are going to pass through the body's surface. So whole body planes, let me make myself bigger again because I want to kind of show you. Okay, so we have the sagittal plane, and I usually use the skeleton for this. Okay, this is Sonny. You guys haven't met him yet. He's my skeleton for the class. And generally I use him to point out a lot of things, so we'll go ahead and use him today as best as we can. It's kind of hard, but we'll see what we can do. All right, so sagittal planes. That's going to break the body up into a left and right half. So basically, if I were to take Sonny here and slice him right down the middle where he would have this side and this side, so you would have, I'll stand behind him, so you would have, you're going to split him right down the middle. You would have a right side and a left side. So it's basically a horizontal line, a vertical line, vertical right down the middle. And it breaks them up into left and right halves. Now, sagittal doesn't have to be perfect down the middle. Sagittal can be skewed to one side. It could be that I have cut him right through here and cut his arm off. Okay, that's still a sagittal plane because you're still vertical and you're still leaving him with a right half and now a small, left half, but it's still left and right. Mid-sagittal, that's just meaning that you are perfect down the middle. So if we say mid-sagittal, we mean perfectly down the midline. Okay. Transverse is a horizontal cut. Okay, that means you're cutting him horizontally, so you're leaving him with the superior half and the inferior half. It could be something, it doesn't have to be perfect here. It could be you cut his head off. Okay, as long as you're still cutting that horizontal, and now we have the head as superior with the rest of the body as inferior, that's still a transverse cut. Now, frontal coronal is a little more difficult to see, but if I turn Sonny and give you a profile view, the frontal or coronal cut is you're going down, you're still vertical, but now you're cutting the body into a front or anterior half and a posterior half because you're cutting him down the side and his profile view. Hopefully that helped, being able to see Sonny. If you do have questions, then, we can talk during the Zoom meeting about that. Okay. This is just a picture showing you the different planes, and I do have a video clip there that will, go through this again. The PowerPoint presentation for these notes will be made available so that you can click directly on that link. All right, so what I just went over was how we do the planes for the whole body. They're slightly different words from we're just looking at an organ point of view. Normally we dissect a sheep brain in here. Don't know if you guys will be able to do that or not, at least not physically, maybe virtually. But we cut it longitudinally, which means we cut it through the long axis of the organ. Okay, so I went and got a brain. I figured, why not? Okay, this is a sheep brain. Trying not to drip on my computer, so bear with me. All right, so sheep brain. Now they are four-legged animals, so instead of the little brain stem going down like it goes for us, it's on the back of the brain this way because their spinal cord, is horizontal to the floor where ours is vertical. Anyway, so here's the brain. Okay, here is, let me make sure I turn it right so it's in the right position. This is the right hemisphere, left hemisphere. You've got the cerebellum brainstem. So when we cut this in class, when we dissect it, we cut it longitudinally. See how it's longer this way than it is this way. So that's what I mean by a longitudinal cut. We cut it on the long axis. Okay, versus the other one on your screen there says transverse or cross section. So if we were to cut it, it would be through the short axis this way. But we don't do it that way when we cut the brain. We cut it this way so we can see what we need to see. There's also another cut that you can do. That's a one that refers to organs usually, and that is an oblique, which is cutting it at an angle, a diagonal cut. Okay, so longitudinal is long way. Transverse is a cross section, which means you're cutting along the short axis, and oblique means that you're making a cut diagonally through the organ. Okay, and moving on, almost there. So this is just a picture showing you the brain that I just showed you pretty much with the longitudinal cut on the long axis and the cross section on the short axis, and then a diagonal, which is called our oblique plane. All right, let's go back to Sunny because we're going to look at our different body cavities. Let me make the picture a little bigger again so you can see him a little better. All right, so we have the thoracic cavity. Thoracic is basically everything that's inside this rib cage. Okay, the rib cage is what bounds your thoracic cavity together. What's going to separate it from the abdominal cavity would be the diaphragm, which is a thin muscle that runs right here underneath your lungs. So if Sonny still had all of his organs and all of his tissues, you would see a very thin muscle stretched across right here, which would be the barrier between your thoracic cavity and your abdominal cavity. Now, the abdominal cavity is really, it just has those abdominal muscles that surround it that's going to hold everything in. Okay, so there's no bones or anything here for protection. And then you have the pelvic cavity, which is pretty much right here between your pelvic bones. It's the smallest cavity. Generally, you have reproductive organs, and the urinary bladder is there. But that's about all that you're going to find down here. And then sometimes you'll hear the abdominopelvic or abdominopelvic cavity, which means they're just kind of combining the two when they refer to it. Okay, so thoracic cavity is the rib cage bound by the ribs with that thin little diaphragm muscle that's going to separate it from the abdominal cavity. The abdominal cavity is held in by the abdominal muscles, and then you have the pelvic cavity, small down here, but it's between these pelvic bones. Okay. Okay. Still need to look at Sunny here for this, but I wanted you to be able to look at the slide real quick before we moved on. There are other body cavities to be familiar with. One's dealing with the head, called the cranial. One's dealing with the backbone or spinal cord, which is called the spinal cavity. And then you have the mediastinum, which is in there in the thoracic cavity. So let me make this big again so you can see Sunny. All right, so let me move the screen up. And we have Sunny's head, which I have covered up in a do-rag and goggles because he's in lab, so he needs to have his safety goggles on. He wasn't wearing his safety goggles, so that's why he doesn't have an eye there and has to wear an eye patch. Always wear your safety goggles. All right, so the cranial cavity is basically right here in the head. That's where you're going to find the brain. Okay, and then you have your backbone here that has basically a tunnel or canal that runs all the way through it for your spinal cord. So that's your spinal cavity that's inside that backbone that's going to protect your spinal cord. And then going back here to the front, inside the thoracic cavity, kind of right in here, you're going to have the mediastinum, which is basically an opening that your heart is going to sit in. And we'll talk more about the mediastinum when we get to the cardiovascular unit, but it's just kind of a cavity inside of a cavity, a heart space inside of the thoracic cavity. All right, and this is just showing you the pictures of the body cavities, just as I said, but now you can kind of see them for real cranial cavity versus the vertebral cavity, which we call the spinal cavity, same thing. And you have the thoracic cavity there, shows you where the diaphragm's supposed to be, abdominal cavity, and the pelvic cavity. All right, just a little bit more. We'll be done with this unit. Within the body's trunk, there are tissues and membranes that are going to bind and connect things together, and they are called serous membranes. So they're all inside, all your cavities are surrounding your organs, and they're trying to cover them and protect them and cushion and lubricate, because you're bouncing around and moving everywhere, and things are just, you got to be able to help cushion and reduce friction. Not to mention that your heart's constantly beating, your lungs are constantly inflating and deflating as you're breathing. So you need something in there that's going to help with the cushioning, lubrication, and all that. So inside these serous membranes are two layers, and there's fluid in between. The visceral layer is the inner layer, and the parietal layer is the outer layer. And again, there's fluid in the middle to help with that cushioning and lubrication. All right, there's a little bit of a picture just to kind of show you some of those membranes that are all inside. This is showing the abdominal cavity, showing the large intestine. You can see the stomach there in the first picture, but just kind of showing you can even see blood vessels and stuff running through it. It provides a space for blood vessels to run through, and nerves and all that. Like I said, just to kind of hold things together in there. All right, and then as we go back to the thoracic cavity, it has 3 serous membrane lined cavities. You've got the picture there, so I don't really, need to show you on Sunny, but you have the one that surrounds the heart, called the pericardial. Anytime you see the word cardiac or cardia, it's referring to the heart, so that's going to hold the heart in place. And then pleural refers to the lungs, and so you have 2 lungs, so you have 2 pleural cavities, okay, that are going to be in there and surrounding. So that shows you the visceral and the parietal layers there. On the lung picture, you can see it really well. So, all right, so this is where we are ending our Unit 1 information. So this is all you need to know, which it's plenty. But we're going to do some activities and stuff to help make it a little easier for you to remember. So if you have any questions, again, email me, message me in Canvas. You know where to find me. Thanks, and I'll see you when we Zoom.